So let's dive right into it. So yesterday, Zuckerberg published this huge manifesto arguing that everyone should have access to superintelligence, positioning Meta as the open, democratic alternative to paywalled AI. He tied it to the Industrial Revolution using his own family examples of how he's using AI, and then took direct shots at other AI companies, especially those that have more of a doom framing without naming names. And it's interesting because obviously OpenAI published their own manifesto back in June, which kind of had similar language, which is that AI should belong to everyone and not just a small number of institutions. So obviously some of that message is getting around to all the CEOs of the company. But then on July 27th, Altman declared that we're in the singularity and it's going to be incredibly, hugely positive, awesome for the world. 4 days after that, it got out that his AI escaped containment and autonomously hacked Hugging Face. Anthropic, meanwhile, has gotten caught in investor meetings saying that their pivot to healthcare is designed to mitigate the increasingly negative public sentiment against the industry. They're basically positing that figuring a miracle cure or two would certainly do wonders to turn things around. That's all being said while all three of them are headed towards IPOs or, funding rounds. And it's just been interesting to think about how, Dario at Anthropic has been pretty, I'd say pretty vocal about the doomerism side of things. And then each of the CEOs has in some way kind of talked about, AI affecting things negatively, whether that's jobs being lost or changes happening that, might in terms of like privacy and security. Obviously right now Meta has several high profile cases against Facebook and Instagram and how the algorithm works. There's a couple cases like in California. I think one was just announced in New Mexico that is essentially gonna change how the platform works. And the FTC is currently appealing a ruling against Meta for what they called a buy or bury scheme, essentially saying that it's trying to be a monopoly. So when Zuckerberg is talking about open and free internet and open and free AI, at what point does that come up against what they actually do in public? So Jonathan, have you seen this manifesto? Did you read it? I know it was long, but would love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to read through the manifesto, but it's just such an interesting idea of the democratization of technology, right? And I think philosophically, most of us would agree that that is great in ideals. But the question is, how do you practically bring that to be? And, if you look at public utilities, right, is it really the government itself that ends up creating the infrastructure, or do they subcontract and then make everything accessible? So I would say there's no easy answers here. But obviously, you want the folks who can build the tech be the leaders, but you also want some sort of governmental oversight. So the people, right, we have some sort of a say in where the technology goes and how it affects our everyday lives.
Yeah, I think that's the huge battle we're seeing play out, right? Where, data centers, how AI is being used to capture intelligence, whether through books, right? That was a huge story that came out, I think last week or the week before, about Anthropic destroying books because it had to, it was trying to read them all.
Yep.
Right, read through them. And then you get into it was necessary because legal copyright says that they have to destroy the books. So how much of it is it really that they're doing it because of the intelligence models that they're trying to build versus the legal landscape that they find themselves in and trying to stay on the right side of the law? But, we're seeing those battles play out in communities every day, right? With AI data centers being challenged. I saw, part of what came out after the manifesto was this article in The Verge where journalist Elizabeth Lopatto was pointing out a couple tells from Zuckerberg's examples about how, he was giving examples of how he uses AI at home, where he's working with his daughter who she's coding programs by herself. But he mentions this moment of like finding baking recipes because they're baking together. And the journalist pushes back and says, like, why is this something that you would go to AI for? Why isn't this something you would try to curate yourself and go and like have that be part of the process? And this happened recently too with Sam Altman saying that one of the best examples of AI that he's seen is that you create podcasts based on your children's likes, right? To kind of form conversation with them in the car while you're driving. And most of the people that, pilloried him for it, right? Saying, why aren't you having these conversations with your kid instead of, handing it off to the AI? And I think it's this very interesting, pushback that's happening. There's others example today that actually really annoyed me because this guy for Axios said that he went on vacation, he started reading the classic book, Brand New Worlds, and how he used AI to help him create sort of like a reading guide for himself so that he understood the characters and the themes of the book. And, you have journalists coming out there saying like, the societal brain rot of like, people that can't like read a book or admitting that they can't read a book without AI. And it's just like one of those things where it's like the man admitted that this was a book that he would have read on his own. So is it not better for him to try to read the book? Is this not like the type, like we had, what were those Cliff Notes, right? We had Cliff Notes books for the longest time to help people learn the themes and all that, right? And I just think people kind of take things too far where it's like, you can't imagine a way that you would use the product in the same way that these people are, so then you just like get really negative about it instead of trying to be open to the idea that some people need more help than others to do things that wouldn't. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know how much you use AI in your personal or professional life, but are those things that like you think about?
Absolutely. So I wouldn't consider myself an expert on AI, but my undergraduate degree was in electrical engineering. I've always worked very closely, with developers through the years of my career. And I was part of an AI startup for a year as well. And so I definitely have thought through, wrestled through some of the philosophical and practical implications of artificial intelligence. It is a tool I use fairly regularly, but I also recognize the concerns people have both around the practical implications of the impact in the environment, as well as philosophically, the implications around how do we end up teaching? How do we end up thinking? Are we going to lose the ability to think critically because the machine's doing it for us? Now, my overall perspective is that I am optimistic about tools such as artificial intelligence. I take just a broader, view of history and technology. And I have this perspective that many of us, especially who are privileged enough, anybody who's listening to this podcast, right, is living better than kings 200 years ago.
Yeah.
We have better water, better healthcare, better shelter, right? More access to community and people. It's not that we always take advantage and leverage technology in the healthiest ways, right? And that is one of the criticisms of companies like Meta and the way that they leverage their algorithm to hook people in. But is my life better because I found out about my high school reunion through Facebook? Is my life better because, through the years I was able to connect and have community and leverage the marketplace to sell items and buy used items and recycle, items instead of buying brand new, right? Like, are there elements of technology that are better? I think generally, yes, right? And many of the people who have been afraid of artificial intelligence and how that's going to affect the way that we think and affect the next generation, I agree. I applaud that sentiment. But also, don't we think that something like artificial intelligence is fairly analogous to mobile phones, to the internet? Let's go all the way back to the calculator. I assume that teachers back in the day were freaking out that calculators existed because we thought students would no longer figure out how to do math in their head. And maybe I can't multiply 17 by 13 as well as somebody 30 years ago, but are we solving more complicated issues? Right? Are because of calculators were we able to invent things like such as the internet. Because of the internet, where we're able to invent, all sorts of create industries and innovations and advancements that make our lives better. I do think healthcare is a very practical, application
Hmm.
that AI was already helping detect, cancer earlier than ever before, right? And there will be more cases like that. When we think about energy consumption and water usage,
Hmm.
which really hits near to home because of the Utah data center debate, right?
Hmm.
Do we think that potentially a tool such as AI might create more solutions for clean, renewable energy?
Hmm.
I'm generally optimistic that it will, while also recognizing that the application of technology has not always been for the better for mankind, right? There will always be those who are leveraging things selfishly and leveraging
Hmm.
things for their own gain without, thought to others and community and the good of others and the environment. I recognize that. But generally, I think that technology is good for us.
Yeah, that's one of the things I actually really appreciated about Zuckerberg's manifesto is how much he was able to both tie it back to previous examples of the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution and how humanity changed significantly because of the technological progress that came from those eras, and then all the innovations that kind of stemmed from it. He mentioned how, we were then able to create food in a faster way, and how that made cities grow, and then from like the cities growing, like all the innovations that came from that. So I like that he was able to put that in a historical context. I also liked that he's able to speak about AI in a way that wasn't just that doomerism, right? I think part of Dario Amode's problem with how he's talking about AI and Anthropic and Claude is that, he keeps mentioning that lawyers and accountants, they're all going to lose their jobs because AI is going to take them, without making it seem as if, without pushing also forward that we don't know what sort of new jobs are going to get created because of the advent of AI. And I'm more of a, abundance or growth mindset type person, where it's like we don't even know what jobs are going to get created from this. Even right now, like my job has completely changed. I'm able to work with more clients, work more in depth in ways that I couldn't before because of AI. And I really think it's both up to the individual, yes, to decide how they want to do it, but it's also for us as society to have these discussions and actually try to get to the point of like, how is it that it's going to benefit society and like the humans that are also getting displaced by the water, and and that, yes, the salary and all that I get, but not just also. I think part of what I'm trying to say is like I see a lot of these discussions happening, and like the immediate thing is you just want to shut it down, instead of trying to like get to the point. I mean, there's been a couple of high profile like artists or creative, one of them being Hank Green, right, that came out a couple weeks ago saying that he used AI to help him research, which is like one of the best use cases for AI, right? If he uses that as a way to do more or try to do more. And his fans came out and just completely like got him to apologize and take back, what he was doing or the project he was working on, because he now felt uncomfortable in how he was kind of, putting himself out there, but then also how his fans were seeing him. And I think that's one issue. The other one is the discussion that we're having now about data centers, right? Like you have a lot of misinformation happening about what a data center actually means, like for the community, right? And we're starting to see some journalists like push back and put out the facts about how much property tax is being funneled back into the community. How I think there was an example this week in South Carolina. Where like the town has seen, immense growth, and like prices are skyrocketing for rents and food and everything because the community is now bringing in a whole bunch of workers that are trying to work at the data center. So I think that we need to be having these nuanced conversations about that. My one thing though is like, should Facebook and should Anthropic, should OpenAI be the ones having these like, discussions by themselves without having any other people that are also on the side of optimism speak to how these companies should be providing for the communities that they're trying to go into?
That is a tricky question. I would imagine if they were wise, they are seeking counsel. right? And, I've worked at multi-billion-dollar organizations that do a lot of research and are really trying to get at the core of what problems we're trying to solve. Now, I realize that's not always true. And when we're busy and when we're in our own worlds, we're just trying to make decisions in advance. But I do think it is important, and that's why it's actually helpful for these companies to post manifestos so we know what they're thinking. Now, I also am not naive enough to believe that everything they say is exactly what they practice, whether or not they intend to or not, right? It's just when you're managing a multi-billion-dollar company, you will not know everything that's going on, but that's where vision and culture come into play. Now, should they be getting feedback from the general public and government officials and other companies and nonprofits? Absolutely, yes. Now, practically, what might that look like? I'm really not sure.
Yeah, and I think that that's a thing that all of us, should kind of think about. And I think particularly, marketers who on both sides, right? Like I've met marketers who are just like, no, I don't use AI at all. And then I've met the marketers who are like, oh my God, it's changed everything that I do and how I do it. But yeah, figuring out how to have those conversations, especially as our own work gets affected, right? I've seen a couple anecdotes of people saying that as soon as they see a company use AI, or both like to write or in images, they're like, that completely turns me off from the company. So I think us as marketers have to know where our audience stands, because we're going to be affected if we do use AI and our audience hates it. But on the flip side, like if our audience expects us to use it because we're saying that we're like tech forward and AI forward and everything, and you're not using it to the best of the ability, or it just looks so fake, then that's also detrimental to your product and service or whatever it is that you're trying to promote. So there's definitely that nuance there. But I think it comes down to the individuals of like, well, what is it that you think from your community? How is your audience going to react? What are these things that you can do and say that puts you right in front of your target audience? So that's a lesson for me. One of the other lessons is this whole idea of, is this just rhetoric? This whole idea of democratic access. Is it the whole idea of like farm to table or organic, where it gets labeled as this elite thing in order to get people of that tier to recognize what it is? But will it play out that way when it turns out that an open source model isn't the most profitable, And I think that that's something that like we need to think about when we are marketing ourselves and putting this messaging out there, to not use such lofty language that it'll come back and bite us in the ass when it doesn't turn out that way in the future. And obviously, Meta can always say that like, this is where we were at that point and now we have to go in this direction. Or maybe it is true that for them, because they are doing more consumer models or straight to individuals, as opposed to Anthropic that's doing more, enterprise sales or, company to company, it makes more sense for Meta to own we're, here for democratic access. So that's a way to kind of think about how you're positioning yourself against your competitors, in order to show people what the differences are between the two of you.
And I do believe that words matter. And again, I recognize, and I'm not naive enough to believe that everyone who says what they are going to do actually follows through. And we see this in politics very often. And, large corporations, whether or not they will admit it, are political, beings. And they, what they say has effects on the broader society as well as their own companies. But what you say does matter. And I also think, as a marketer, I've a few different kind of strong opinions about AI because I have used it as a tool. And I think that's what it is for us, at least, right? There are these broader implications, but just like an analytics dashboard or a word processor or the laptop that we're on, right? Artificial intelligence and the applications of those products are tools. And so we can use them for good or we can use them for bad, just like we can use marketing for good or use marketing for bad. Again, I try to take the generally optimistic view that the purpose of a company is to add value to the world. And I think that just by the nature of the fact that a company exists, that they're selling products, means they are adding value so much that somebody's willing to trade money for their product or service. There's some exchange of value. There's some value creation. Again, I recognize some products in the world are maybe not the best for people. And there's a lot of more complex factors. But broadly speaking, you can use AI for good then. As a marketer, for example, I support one of my clients is a really great nonprofit called Warrior Rising that is veteran entrepreneurs who have created programs and support to help other veteran entrepreneurs grow their businesses.
Mhm.
And I have saved hours of my life and improved quality on data analytics because I've gathered data and then I leverage a tool in Claude to help me find and analyze what's working and what's not and create
Mhm.
charts and helps me find implications. And
Mhm.
I've saved hours and gleaned a lot of insights that have helped a cool organization like Warrior Rising grow, right?
Mhm.
So I think the application of the tool is very important.
One of the huge ways that I use it is having that data visualization, right? Because I see things in my head, but I can't actually do it myself. So it's easier to speak to the AI to get that, to come out. And then people, that are more visual in that sense can see the data in a way that they never would have thought of before and then make decisions based off that. So totally agree that there's like ways to use tools. And I think that's one thing I did like about how he talked about, AI in his manifesto is talking about AI as a tool and how it can do things. And he went through like a variety of examples in healthcare, science, um, and using it in that way. So overall, I do think that the messaging is good. I think from a comms standpoint, how we're kind of um positioning ourselves and talking about those vision statements matter. The only pushback I'd say is that it was never put in the context, and of course he doesn't want to put it in the context of Facebook, or Meta, and Instagram and everything that's happening, legally. But it did make me question throughout, like, is Facebook the best company to be doing this when we know how they have reacted with social media, which is that their business model is always going to win and they're always going to put the profits ahead, regardless of the societal wrong, or bad that it's done. But I mean, that's a thing that should be discussed by all of us going forward. Awesome.